The night before the big presentation, Stella could hardly sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling of her luxurious apartment, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. Her chance to secure the biggest deal of her career. If she nailed this, she would be one step closer to the kind of wealth and influence she had always dreamed of. But there was just one problem. She had nothing to wear. Not that she didn't have clothes. Her wardrobe was filled with expensive dresses, silk blouses, and high heels that clicked against the marble floors of her penthouse. But something was missing. A final touch that would make her look as powerful as she needed to feel. A new wig. Stella sighed and rolled over, staring at the golden lamp on her bedside table. Her long brown human hair wig was old. It didn't have the same glow it once had, and under the bright lights of the boardroom, everyone would see how tired it looked. She couldn't afford to look anything less than perfect. Then, like a flash of lightning, she remembered something. Ella. Her next-door neighbor had worn a stunning wig just 2 days ago. The kind that bounced when she walked, that made her look like a queen stepping out of a royal carriage. It was full, silky, and black as midnight. Stella sat up in bed. Would Ella let her borrow it? She hesitated. She and Ella weren't exactly close friends. They were just neighbors who exchanged polite greetings in the hallway. Ella was quiet, always smiling but never really talking much. Sometimes Stella felt like she wasn't fully there. But desperate times called for desperate measures. The next morning, as soon as Stella finished her coffee, she knocked on Ella's door. The door creaked open almost immediately, as if Ella had been standing there, waiting for her. Ella smiled, her dark eyes fixed on Stella as if she already knew why she was there. "Good morning, neighbor," Ella said in a soft, almost musical voice. "Good morning, Ella," Stella replied, suddenly feeling awkward. I wanted to ask for a little favor." Ella tilted her head slightly, still smiling. "Favor?" "Yes," Stella said, clearing her throat. "I saw the wig you wore the other day. It's beautiful. I have a very important presentation today, and I was wondering if I could borrow it. Just for today." Ella's smile widened. "You want to borrow my wig?" she asked, as if the idea amused her. "Yes, please," Stella said. "I'll return it by evening. I just need to look perfect for my presentation." For a moment, Ella didn't say anything. She just stared at Stella with an expression Stella couldn't quite read. Then, without another word, she turned back into her apartment. Stella waited, her heartbeat quickening. A minute later, Ella returned. In her hands was the wig, shiny, perfect, and as dark as a moonless night. She held it out without hesitation. "Here," Ella said, placing it in Stella's hands. Stella was surprised. No hesitation. No questions. She smiled, feeling relieved. "Thank you so much, Ella. I promise to take good care of it." Ella simply nodded. As Stella turned to leave, she felt a strange sensation, like a cold whisper against her ear. She glanced back, but Ella had already shut the door. Shrugging it off, Stella rushed back to her apartment. She had a presentation to get ready for. By the time Stella arrived at the office, she was glowing. The wig was a perfect fit. It felt smooth against her scalp, soft and luxurious. She couldn't help but admire herself in the mirror before stepping into the conference room. Her colleagues noticed immediately. "Wow, Stella! You look amazing today," said Funmi, one of her team members. "Is that a new wig?" "It's gorgeous," another colleague added. Stella smiled confidently. "Thank you. I just wanted to look my best for the presentation." Everyone was in high spirits, the energy in the office lively as they prepared for the most important deal of the year. Investors had flown in from abroad, the CEO himself was in attendance, and all eyes were on Stella. She was ready, or so she thought. As she stood at the front of the conference room, flipping through her slides, everything seemed perfect. She spoke with confidence, her voice smooth, her ideas clear. She could see the nods of approval from the executives. She was winning them over. But then, something shifted. A strange wave of heat rushed through her body. She blinked rapidly, gripping the edge of the table as the numbers on the screen blurred before her eyes. Her head spun. The air in the room suddenly felt too thick, like she was being swallowed by something unseen. Her fingers trembled. Her legs felt weak. A sharp pain shot through her skull. She gasped. The room tilted. Then, to everyone's shock, Stella collapsed. A collective gasp filled the room as her colleagues rushed to her side. Stella, are you okay? She heard voices, distant and muffled, as if she were underwater. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The last thing she saw before everything faded to black was the CEO's concerned face hovering over her. And in the reflection of the glass table beside her, the wig on her head seemed to move, as if it were alive. A sharp, ringing sound filled Stella's ears. Darkness surrounded her. Somewhere in the distance, voices murmured. Shadows moved. A heavy, throbbing pain in her head, like a hammer striking against her skull. Her eyelids fluttered open, and she found herself lying on the office couch, her colleagues hovering over her like anxious birds. Stella, can you hear me? It was Funmi's voice, but it sounded far away. Stella tried to sit up, but her body felt like it was made of stone. What happened? She whispered. You fainted, someone said. Right in the middle of your presentation. The room swam before her eyes. Fainted. That had never happened to her before. A cool hand touched her forehead. She's burning up, Funmi said. We need to get her home. Stella tried to protest. The presentation wasn't over. She had to finish it. She needed this deal. But her body betrayed her. Her arms trembled as she struggled to lift herself. The wig on her head suddenly felt heavy, as if something were pressing down on her skull. Then, like a whisper through the air, she heard something. Voice. Faint, eerie voice. Go home, Stella. Her breath hitched. She looked around, but no one else seemed to have heard it. Fear crawled up her spine. Before she could say anything, her colleagues gently helped her to her feet. The moment she stood up, another wave of dizziness crashed over her, and the office blurred again. She barely registered them escorting her out of the building. As they placed her in the back seat of a company car, she caught a glimpse of herself in the window's reflection. Her face looked different, paler, sunken, and the wig didn't look as silky as before. It looked darker, heavier, almost like it was gripping her head. Back at home, Stella collapsed onto her bed, exhausted. Her body burned with fever, and sweat trickled down her forehead. She groaned, pushing the wig off her head and tossing it onto the dressing table. The moment it left her scalp, a strange chill washed over her. Felt like relief. Like she had been carrying something too heavy and finally let it go. Her phone buzzed beside her. With weak fingers she picked it up. It was her elder sister, Amara. She swiped to answer. Hello, Stella. I heard what happened. Are you okay? Amara's voice was filled with concern. I don't know, Stella whispered. I feel strange. Was strange how? Stella hesitated. How could she explain it? That she felt like something was draining the life out of her. That she had heard a voice whisper in her ear. She swallowed hard. I'm just really sick. Maybe I'm overworked. I'm coming over, Amara said firmly. Stella didn't argue. She needed help. She needed someone to tell her that everything was going to be okay. A few hours later, Amara arrived with a bag of medications. The moment she stepped into the apartment, she frowned. What is that smell? Stella sat up weakly. Smell. Amara sniffed the air, her face twisting in disgust. It's like something is rotting in here. Stella didn't smell anything. But before she could respond, Amara was already moving around the apartment, checking the kitchen, the trash, even under the bed. Maybe it's coming from outside, Stella said tiredly. Amara sighed and sat beside her, pressing a hand to her forehead. You're burning up, she murmured. She opened her bag and handed Stella some pills and a bottle of water. Take these. They'll help with the fever. Stella swallowed the pills obediently, hoping they would work fast. But deep down, something told her this wasn't an ordinary sickness. She lay back down, her head pounding. Amara stroked her hair gently. For a moment Stella felt safe. But then, loud crash. Both sisters jerked up in alarm. The sound had come from the dressing table. The wig had fallen to the floor. The room was silent. Too silent. A cold shiver ran through Stella's body. It must have slipped, Amara said, standing up to pick it up. But as she bent down to reach for it, Stella grabbed her wrist. "Don't," she whispered. Amara frowned. Why? Stella didn't know why. She just felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Like if Amara touched the wig, something terrible would happen. Amara gave her a worried look but didn't argue. She straightened up and folded her arms. "Where did you even get that wig from?" Stella hesitated. "I borrowed it from my neighbor, Ella." Amara's frown deepened. "Ella? I don't think I've ever seen her." "She doesn't go out much," Stella said weakly. Amara stared at the wig for a moment, then shook her head. "Well, after today you're giving it back," she said firmly. Stella nodded. But in her heart, she wasn't sure if she even wanted to touch the wig again. By the next morning things got worse. The fever didn't break. And now something new had appeared. Tiny bumps. Scattered across Stella's arms and neck. She stared at herself in the mirror. Horror creeping into her chest. Her skin looked different. The bumps weren't normal. They were dark. Like tiny bruises forming beneath her flesh. Her breathing quickened. She rushed to the living room where Amara was making tea. "Amara," she choked out. "Look." Amara turned, and the moment she saw Stella's skin, her eyes widened in shock. "What is that?" "I don't know," Stella whispered, fear clawing at her throat. Amara grabbed her keys. "That's it. We're going to the hospital. Now." The hospital was cold and sterile, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. Stella sat on the examination table while the doctor examined her skin with a deep frown. After a while he sighed and leaned back. "We'll run some tests," he said. "But honestly, I've never seen anything like this before." Stella's heart sank. "What do you mean?" Amara demanded. "Isn't it just an infection?" The doctor hesitated. "It doesn't behave like one. The bumps appeared too quickly, and there's no sign of bacteria or virus." "So what is it?" Stella asked, her voice barely a whisper. The doctor sighed. "We'll find out." But deep in her heart, Stella already knew. This wasn't an ordinary sickness. This wasn't normal. And as she sat there, fear tightening around her chest, one terrifying thought echoed in her mind. Stella lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights above her flickered slightly, casting strange shadows on the walls. She felt trapped. The doctors had run every test they could think of. Blood tests, skin biopsies, even scans, but the results were always the same. Nothing was wrong with her. Nothing medically. Yet her body told a different story. The bumps on her skin had grown bigger overnight. They were no longer just bumps. They were turning into painful dark boils, spreading across her arms and neck like a slow-moving curse. Every touch burned. Every movement ached. Her once radiant skin now looked sickly, as if something beneath it was rotting. But the worst part, she could feel something watching her. Amara sat beside her, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. "How can the test say you're fine when you look like this?" Stella didn't answer. Because the truth was, she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. What if the problem wasn't something a doctor could diagnose? What if the problem was something else? A chill ran down her spine. "Stella," Amara said, her voice firm. "We're leaving." Stella blinked. "What?" "We've been here for days, and you're only getting worse. The doctors have no answers. It's time to try something else." Stella swallowed. "Like what?" Amara hesitated, then leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "There's someone I heard about," she said. "A pastor. People say he's powerful. That he's dealt with strange things before." Stella's chest tightened. Pastor. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to say no, that it was ridiculous. that there was a logical explanation for all of this. But deep down she knew better. Logical explanations had failed her. She was dying, and she had no idea why. Slowly she nodded. "Take me to him." The church was on the outskirts of the city, far from the polished skyscrapers and gated estates. The building was small but sturdy, with a simple wooden cross mounted above the entrance. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the scent of burning incense and the soft hum of whispered prayers. The moment Stella and Amara stepped through the doors, an elderly man sitting by the altar turned to look at them. His eyes, deep, knowing, locked onto Stella immediately. He shivered. He knew. Without a word, he stood and beckoned them forward. They obeyed. As they reached him, the pastor studied Stella carefully, his gaze moving over her sickly skin, the dark boils forming across her arms. Then he asked in a calm, steady voice, "Where did you get the wig?" Stella's breath caught in her throat. Amara stiffened beside her. Neither of them had mentioned anything about the wig. How did you know?" Stella whispered. The pastor didn't answer immediately. He simply motioned for them to sit, then closed his eyes, as if listening to something they couldn't hear. Minutes passed. "You were never meant to wear that wig," he said softly. Stella's fingers dug into her lap. "What do you mean?" The pastor opened his eyes, staring at her with quiet intensity. "The woman who gave it to you. She is not what she seems." A thick silence filled the room. Stella's mind spun. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Ella. She's just my neighbor." The pastor shook his head. "Oh, she is not." A strange, tight feeling wrapped around Stella's chest. Amara reached for her hand, squeezing it. "Pastor, please, explain." The pastor sighed. "Tell me," he said. "Have you ever seen Ella outside beyond your building?" Stella blinked. The question was simple. Too simple. But when she searched her memory, she realized something. Oh. She had never seen Ella outside their apartment complex. She had never seen her at the grocery store, or in a cab, or anywhere else in the city. Just in the building. Just in the hallways. Always close. Always there. A slow, creeping horror began to rise in her stomach. "She's a spirit," the pastor said. Stella's breath hitched. Amara gasped. "A spirit?" Amara echoed. "That's not possible. She has an apartment." She. The pastor raised a hand, silencing her. "She has what she needs to appear real," he said. "But she is not. And the wig she gave you. It was never meant to be worn by the living." Stella's heartbeat pounded in her ears. The room felt too small. Too hot. "She wanted to kill me," she whispered. The pastor nodded. "Yes," he said. "And if you do not act quickly, she will succeed." Stella's body went cold. She didn't need any more convincing. "Tell me what to do," she whispered. The pastor exhaled, as if relieved that she finally understood. "You must destroy the wig," he said. "Completely." Stella shuddered. The thought of touching it, of even going near it, made her skin crawl. But she had no choice. She wanted to live. And that meant facing the thing that was killing her. That evening, Stella, Amara, and the pastor returned to Stella's apartment. The moment they stepped inside, a foul, choking scent filled the air. Decade. Amara gagged. "What is that?" The pastor didn't answer. He simply pointed toward the dressing table. Toward the wig. It was still on the floor, exactly where Stella had left it. But something was different. It looked darker, heavier, like it had been feeding on something. Her stomach lurched. "Bring it to me," the pastor said. Stella hesitated, her fingers trembling. She didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to feel that awful, crawling sensation again. But she had to. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she bent down, picked up the wig. And the moment her fingers brushed the strands, a scream tore through her mind. Not her scream. Ella's. A wailing, agonized, rage-filled scream. Stella's legs buckled. She would have collapsed if Amara hadn't caught her. The pastor acted quickly. He grabbed a small bottle of oil, muttering prayers under his breath as he sprinkled it onto the wig. The moment the oil touched it, the wig moved, twisted, as if something inside it was writhing, fighting to break free. The pastor threw the wig into a metal basin and struck a match. The fire roared to life. The wig let out an unearthly, ear-piercing shriek. Stella covered her ears, her entire body shaking. The room trembled. The lights flickered. And then, silence. The wig was gone, burned to nothing but ashes. And as the smoke curled toward the ceiling, Stella felt something lift from her chest. Wait. Sickness. Darkness. She gasped. And for the first time in days, she could breathe. Stella sat on the floor of her apartment, her chest rising and falling in deep, shaky breaths. The room was quiet now. The horrible, suffocating presence that had weighed on her for days was gone. The wig was nothing but ashes in the metal basin. But she wasn't relieved. Not yet. Because she knew this wasn't over. The pastor stood over the basin, murmuring prayers under his breath, his voice steady and firm. Amara held Stella's hand tightly, her face pale. "Is it gone?" Stella whispered. The pastor exhaled slowly, closing his bottle of anointing oil. "The wig is destroyed," he said. "But we are not done yet." A cold shiver ran through Stella's spine. "What do you mean?" Amara asked, her voice wary. The pastor looked toward the door. "We need to know if she is truly gone." Ella, the spirit, the woman, or whatever she was, who had given Stella the cursed wig. The moment the pastor mentioned her, Stella felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Something deep inside told her that whatever was attached to that wig wasn't going to let go so easily. With hesitant steps, the three of them made their way down the hallway toward Ella's apartment. Stella's heart pounded with every step. The hallway was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Usually, the sound of distant traffic seeped in from the city outside. The muffled chatter of neighbors, the hum of televisions, the occasional bark of a dog. There was always some kind of life in the building. But tonight there was nothing. Just silence. The kind that made your skin crawl. When they reached Ella's door, Stella hesitated. She had never been inside Ella's apartment before. Even when she borrowed the wig, Ella had handed it to her at the door, smiling as if she had been expecting her. And smile. Now that Stella thought about it, there had been something off about it. Something unnatural. The pastor raised his hand and knocked once. The sound echoed down the hallway. No response. He knocked again. Still nothing. A strange, tight feeling wrapped around Stella's chest. "She's not here," Amara whispered. The pastor narrowed his eyes. "We need to check inside." Amara stiffened. "No. We can't just enter her apartment." But before she could finish, the door creaked open. On its own. A cold wind rushed out from the darkened apartment, carrying with it the scent of something old. "Ill. Button." Stella clutched Amara's arm. The pastor didn't hesitate. He stepped inside first, holding up his small bottle of oil. Stella and Amara followed, their steps slow and cautious. The apartment was empty. Completely empty. No furniture. No decorations. No sign that anyone had ever lived there. Stella's breath caught in her throat. "What is this?" Amara whispered. "Where are her things?" The pastor remained silent, his eyes scanning the room carefully. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. This place, it felt hollow, like a shell, like a place that had been abandoned for years. Stella's hands trembled. Had Ella ever really lived here? Had she ever really existed? As that terrifying thought settled in her mind, her eyes landed on the one thing in the entire apartment. A single full-length mirror. It stood in the center of the empty living room. Untouched. Perfectly clean. Too clean. Something deep inside Stella screamed at her not to go near it. But she couldn't stop herself. Slowly she took a step forward. Then another. And another. She was close enough now to see her own reflection. But something was off. Her reflection was too slow. When she blinked, it blinked a second later. When she raised her hand, the reflection hesitated before doing the same. Her breath hitched. The reflection smiled. But Stella hadn't. A scream tore from her throat as she stumbled backward. Amara grabbed her. What is it? The mirror, Stella gasped. Something, someone. But before she could finish, the pastor was already moving. He uncorked the bottle of oil and, without hesitation, flung it at the mirror. The moment the oil touched the glass, the mirror shattered. A terrible, wailing scream filled the apartment. A scream that didn't belong to any of them. The lights flickered violently. The walls trembled. Stella clung to Amara, her heart racing in terror. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The room fell into silence once more. Stella's breath came in quick, shallow gasps. The mirror lay in 1,000 broken pieces on the floor, the reflection gone. The apartment felt lighter. The suffocating energy that had filled it moments ago had vanished. The pastor exhaled deeply. It is done. Stella swallowed hard. She's gone. The pastor nodded. She has no more hold here. A shuddering breath left Stella's lips. It was over. Ella was gone. For good. The next morning, the entire building was buzzing with rumors. People had gone to check Ella's apartment, only to find it completely empty. No one could explain it. One moment she had been living there, smiling, greeting neighbors, minding her business. And the next, vanished. Not a single piece of furniture left behind. Not even a trace of dust. It was as if she had never existed. Stella heard whispers, speculations. Maybe she was never real. Maybe she was a spirit all along. But Stella didn't need to guess. She knew. Ella had been something unnatural, something dark, something that had almost taken her life. But now it was over. And she would never make the mistake of borrowing something she didn't understand again. Days passed. Stella's body began to heal. The boils faded. The sickness left her. Her strength returned. And with each day she felt more like herself again. She had come dangerously close to death. But she had survived. And now she understood something she never had before. Some things, some gifts were not meant to be accepted. And some neighbors were not who they seemed to be. The sun shone brightly over the city, casting golden light on the towering buildings and luxurious estates. Life moved on as it always had. Drivers honked impatiently in traffic, wealthy shoppers strolled in and out of designer stores, and business deals were being sealed over expensive lunch meetings. But for Stella, everything felt different. She sat on the balcony of her apartment, sipping a warm cup of tea, staring out at the bustling streets below. The world looked the same, yet she knew it wasn't. Because she had changed. The past weeks had left her physically and emotionally drained, but she was grateful to be alive. The boils on her skin had faded, leaving only faint scars. Her body was still weak, but she was recovering, and that was all that mattered. She had survived something she could barely explain. Something terrifying. Something that still haunted her dreams. Every night, she would wake up in a cold sweat, hearing Ella's eerie voice whispering in the dark. "Stella, borrow my wig again." She would jolt awake, gasping, clutching her sheets. But each time she reminded herself, Ella was gone. The mirror was shattered. The wig was burned. And she was safe. Or at least she hoped so. As the days passed, Stella's strength returned, and she tried to focus on the life she had nearly lost. Her job, her dreams, the presentation that had been ruined. The deal she had worked so hard for had slipped through her fingers the moment she fell sick, and the disappointment still lingered in her chest. But what was a lost deal compared to a lost life? Still, she couldn't help but feel a little bitter. She had borrowed that wig because she wanted to look her best, because she had wanted to fit in, because she had been too ashamed of her own, cheaper wigs. And look where it had gotten her. Nearly 6 feet under. Hard lesson to learn. One evening, Amara came over with a small bag in her hands. "I got you something," she said, sitting next to Stella on the couch. Stella raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Amara grinned and pulled out a beautiful, brand-new wig. It was simple yet elegant. Jet black, soft curls and just the right length. Stella's heart warmed. Amara. You didn't have to. I did, Amara insisted. Because I want you to know that you never have to borrow from anyone ever again. You don't need to impress anyone. And you don't need to wear something that doesn't belong to you to feel beautiful. Stella swallowed the lump in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that. She reached for the wig, running her fingers through the soft strands. And for the first time in weeks she smiled. One night, a week later, Stella stood in front of her mirror, holding Amara's wig in her hands. It was beautiful. But as she stared at her reflection, she realized something. She wasn't afraid of mirrors anymore. She wasn't afraid of wigs. She wasn't afraid of Ella. She had faced something dark, something meant to destroy her. But she had survived. She had won. And she would never ever let something like that happen again. She placed the wig on her head, adjusted it carefully, and took a deep breath. Then she smiled at herself. Not the slow, eerie smile that had haunted her nightmares. Not the twisted grin that had stared back at her from Ella's mirror. But a real, genuine smile. Because she knew now. True beauty wasn't borrowed. It was hers all along.